The chart you are looking at was drafted and finished in early 2004. It is the conclusion of my research in many different ancient calendrical systems, cross-calendrical parallels, strange cycles and epicycles that I have seen in the rise and fall of empires, the disappearance and mass abductions of whole populations and civilizations that were found emptied, buried underground, covered in dirt, no explanation whatsoever. Now, this chart represents probably about a 10-year study for which I had concluded by many different species of arithmetic and analysis that a world-destroying cataclysmic event was going to occur in November 2046. This was long prior to my research into Zecharia Sitchin's Nibiru, or any orbit of Nibiru. It was long prior to my research on Phoenix. I had no idea about the Phoenix history at this point, at this juncture in my life. I had released this chart to over 40 people who started an email campaign in 2004. What happened with that is pretty astonishing. 6 months later, a friend of mine excitedly brings me a copy of the November issue of Discover magazine, one of the 3 most prestigious scientific peer-reviewed magazines in the entire world. On page 24, bad news on the internet. When it comes to astronomy, don't believe everything you see on the web, is the name of the article. It says that the internet has become a reliable source of unreliable urban myths, hoaxes, distortions, and mistakes. Many of the most hysterical postings warn of Armageddon-type encounters with asteroids and comets. The current doomsday craze warns of a deadly asteroid strike in 2046. The 3-column, 1-page article ends, if you want to keep up with what's really happening in the sky, better to ignore random forwarded emails. Now, that was 17 years ago, and my conclusions that I derived about the year 2046 are absolutely independent of what I'm going to show you in this and in the following video. Now, censorship comes in many forms. In this form, it was dismissal. But as we'll see at the end of this video, there's another form censorship comes, a far more sinister one, disinformation. Zecharia Sitchin, author of the popular Earth Chronicles series, never provided a chronology for the orbit of Nibiru, but merely speculated that its orbit was 3,600 years long. As seen in other posts and other videos of my own, this 3,600 years was a glaring mistake on Mr. Sitchin's part involving the interpretation of the length of the Sumerian Shar. We will not revisit that embarrassment here. Too much time has already been spent in other videos on this interpretation. Instead, I offer you a real and demonstrable orbit of the object called Nibiru by Sitchin, but probably known by many other names by the ancients. I prefer Nemesis X object, but I will use Nibiru to prevent any confusion. My published works on the subject contain the source materials. Please remember, as shown in our prior Anunna Files videos, long before Zecharia Sitchin was even born, in the 1890s, scholars, translators were already debating about Nibiru, having found it in many Akkadian texts, whether it was another name for a known planet like Mars or Jupiter, or if Nibiru was a hitherto unknown world. The academics were questioning as they did not know. Also shown in several videos, in 3439 BC we have the first historical recorded appearance of the Anunnaki, exactly 1200 years before the flood. This is also the first appearance of Nibiru. Primitive population of Neolithic humans reduced by a third in massive flooding quakes remembered in the Jasher and the Haggadah writings as the Gihon flood. In this year, the Anunna, the Anunnaki, the Watchers, Enki, Enoch, they all appeared and began building technolithic structures in what later would be called Egypt. This was 1,200 years, or 432,000 days on a 360-day calendar, before the flood of 2239 BC. Now, Nibiru exited the inner solar system orbiting Sol. The Astronomer Royal for Scotland, Piazzi Smith, in the 1870s, wrote that the descending passage of the Great Pyramid pointed directly at the star Alpha Draconis in the year 3440 BC, which is an approximate, pretty dead on, because he's only 1 year off from 3439 BC. Now, this pole star was Alpha Draconis, or the Eye of the Dragon. It is the ancient antediluvian pole star. It is the center of pre-flood calendrics. It is the rotation of the stars. One turning of the stars, the evening to the morning, was a single day. This is why 432,000 of these single turnings was 1,200 years. From the arrival of the Anunnaki to the Great Flood. That Nibiru appeared in these days and killed 1/3 of humanity is not without significance, as we will see in the later records of the apocalypse. In the Book of Jasher records, it reads that in the days of Enosh, the Lord caused the waters of the Gihon to overwhelm them, and he destroyed and he consumed them, and he destroyed a third part of the earth, and there was no food for the sons of men, and the famine was very great in those days. Hebrew tradition holds that there were many earthquakes, drought, and famine in the days of Enosh, and in the Jewish Haggadah text, we find that this flood in Enosh's day occurred long before the flood of Noah. Many centuries ago, Moses Maimonides wrote that in the days of Enosh, men began to build temples to the host of heaven, venerating the stars as deities, and the old one, the creator over time, had been forgotten. The worship of the Anunna from the stars, called watchers, the theme of the older portions of the Book of Enoch, is very prevalent in many other old traditions. The Greeks remember the Anunnaki as the Anadoti, who were believed to have descended to Earth at 4 different times long ago, interacting with men. This is very reminiscent of the Mayan Popol Vuh records that talks about gods descending from the heavens and starting 4 different races of men. The holy tablets by the scholar Diop, fragments borrowed from the Sumerian, Babylonian, Akkadian texts, indicate that the Anunnaki were imprisoned on Nibiru, but were able to get to Earth only during a 60-year period. This means that the Nibiru object stays in the inner solar system for 60 years before vanishing back out toward the star Nemesis, the dark star. And Professor Diop is precisely correct. The object, Nibiru, travels 732 years outside of the inner system, deep into space back toward the sister star Nemesis, the collapsed dark star that we cannot see, but yet we detect through all the gravitational anomalies that we have perceived throughout our solar system, as covered in 2 prior videos. Now, this 732 years outside the solar system is added to the 60 years that Nibiru is inside the solar system. This is for a full 792-year orbit that will remain true all the way to 2046. So 732 years of pre-flood history passes by to the year 2707 BC. Nibiru enters the inner system beginning at 60-year perihelion period. The 60-year window of opportunity for the Anunnaki to visit Earth is documented in Near Eastern text. 60 years Nemesis X object remains in the inner system to the year 2647 BC. Now, this completes its 792-year orbit of Nemesis X object, Nibiru. A Chinese tradition concerning a 60-year period dates its origin to the year 2637 BC. Just can't make that up. Knowing nothing about the Nibiru orbital chronology, Robert Temple's independent research uncovered that ancient Egyptians associated a 60-year period with the crocodile, a calendar symbol, Temple theorizing that the crocodile represented to them the amphibian aliens. 2647 BC marked the exodus of the Anunna from Earth, beginning the abandonment and shock period of pre-flood humanity. Social unrest, wars, racial conflicts, rapid loss of Technolithic knowledge, initiating the post-Technolithic period. 2647 BC was 408 years to the Great Flood in 2239 BC. This 408 years is remembered precisely by the ancient American cultures who claimed that the Fourth Age was the Water Sun epic lasting 408 years, which began their calendar. To recall the exact amount of years, 408 is beyond coincidence. In ancient South America, the people practiced ritual magic in the designing of gigantic geoglyphs of Nazca in an effort to induce the sky gods to return. All around the world, cultures began erecting pyramids, believing that by emulating the work of the gods, the Anunna visitors, these gods would return. Now, it is interesting, during the 792 years of the contact period between orbits of Nibiru in 3439 BC to 2647 BC is when all the ancient calendars of the world were designed. It is when ancient Egypt was started. The Olmec, the Mayan, the Zapotec, the Quickening, all these calendars began. The the Scorpion King calendar, all the Enochian records, every bit of this began at that period of time. It's the contact period. Also, the entire Giza complex and the Great Pyramid was built during that time. After the Anunna left, it was the Anunnaki Exodus. So Nibiru is gone for 732 years as it goes back toward the Nemesis object, way out in the outer solar system. Now, during the 732 years occurs the Great Flood. Every Bronze Age civilization is reset. The human population is basically reset and depopulated. When it returns 732 years later, it is 1915 BC. This completes the 792-year orbit of the Nemesis X object Nibiru. Nibiru enters the inner system and begins its 60-year perihelion period. Ancient Near Eastern texts describe a terrible sky dragon and celestial war that shook the earth. Writings from India describe a great darkness during the daytime and a rain of stones with flames from the sky. In this year of 1915 BC, the Babylonians recorded a great blackness that swallowed the stars, a dark god they called Tiamat, a sky dragon with 7 heads that the Egyptians and later Greeks confused later with Typhon. Its arms stretched 100 leagues in either direction, and instead of hands, she had serpents' heads. Its head touched the stars, and its vast wings darkened the sun, while flaming rocks hit the ground. Now, in the myth of Typhon, the monster in space had a sister also connected to the darkening of the sun, another monster, an alien planet, an intruder world named Delphine, which preserves the root word of phoenix, Del and Phene. In Hesiod's Theogony, about 800 BC, this preserves this event as occurring a short time after Zeus, whom we know as Amar-Udak, later as Mardon, Merodach, and Nimrod. He conquered the Titans, who were the Japhethats and the Anakim. Hesiod wrote that Typhon appeared in the sky with strange heads. This is an old designation for comets with black tails. The dragon heads gave off flames and vibrated the earth with noises as mountains trembled. Thunderbolts struck the earth as water boiled until a fiery hurricane was born. Earthquakes shook the land, and the sea overextended its bounds. The disaster concluded with powerful lightning bolts flashing between Earth and Typhon, which gave rise to the innumerable legends of a hero god who slew a sky monster with his labrys, which was the thunderbolt, later stylized into a battle axe. The thunderbolt was a flux tube of immense electrical energy that passes between 2 planets, which was first witnessed by modern scientists in the year 1994 when comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 collided into Jupiter. In the Ramayana, the Vedic hero Rama fights and defeats the demonic sky goddess monster Thattaka, which is Tiamat, who cast flames down to earth followed by a rain of stones. This was Nibiru's first appearance after the Great Flood, a phenomenon associated to the Anunnaki. At this date, the Near East literally explodes with cuneiform tablet inscriptions concerning the Anunnaki, gods that must be prayed to and sacrificed to in order to keep the heavens in order. This was the 32nd year of the reign of Nimrod, known in Sumerian records as King Amar-Udak, or in Akkadian as Merodach, and later Babylon as Marduk, vanquisher of Tiamat. He is the ancient Zeus, wielder of the thunderbolt. Interestingly, this was the 900th year Anno Pyramid, or the 900th year from the completion of the Great Pyramid, and it was 324 years after the flood, or 108 times 3. Recall that the pyramid was finished in the year 1080, which is 108 times 10, in 2815 BC. A further calendrical coincidence is that this was 1,188 years from the start of the Black Age, or the Kali Yuga of ancient India, which is an Anunnaki-related timeline. And 1,188 is 108 times 11, the number 11 being the sum identifying the Anunnaki according to the Babylonian Enuma Elish text. The number 108 was the most revered number in the ancient East. Even today, there are still 108 beads on Buddhist rosaries. After 60 years in the inner system, we arrive at 1855 BC. While there are no records for the specific year, it is interesting Nibiru exits the Sol system, completing its 792-year orbit. However, 6 years later, in the year 1849 BC, the Harappan, Sumerian, and Sodom and Gomorrah cities are all laid waste in what ancient records describe as technological weapons. This amazing and vast destruction is the subject of another video. Nibiru now spends 732 years outside the inner solar system, far away, approaching aphelion near the dark star. 732 years later, Nibiru returns to the inner system and begins its 60-year perihelion period. A sky dragon appeared over the east. The Chinese record an attack on the sun, and comets fought in the sky. The mandate of heaven in China declared the change of rulership, which only happens when the ruling family cannot maintain the order of the heavens. The Shang dynasty collapses and begins the Zhao dynasty. H.G. Wells, in his monumental work, A Short History of the World, wrote that this collapse of the Shang dynasty occurred in the year 1125 BC. He was 2 years off, and historian Frank Joseph wrote that this all happened in 1122 BC. He was 1 year off on the other side. Both of them are very dead-on accurate, though, for providing approximates going back over 3,000 years. Now, Nibiru stays in the inner system for 60 years. It exits the system in 1063 BC, completing its 792-year orbit, and catapults itself right back out of the system for 732 years as it approaches the dark star. 732 years later, Nibiru returns to the inner system to begin its 60 years of perihelion period. The Macedonians under Alexander and the Persians under Darius III witnessed a partial eclipse. The moon was dimmed and the sky turned blood red. Ptolemy reporting that this was observed as far as Carthage in the west on the North African coast. The Macedonian soldiers reported the frightening spectacle of flames descending from the sky to earth. Modern eclipse computation programs calculate no eclipses for this period seen over the Near East. Weeks later, Alexander's forces were terrified to see more flames coming out of the sky. In this year, Alexander of Macedon becomes Alexander the Great. He sits on the throne of Babylon, ancient seat of the post-flood Anunnaki, after marching his undefeatable Greek army eastward. This year was also the 600th year of the divided kingdom calendar, when Israel and Judah separated. Remember, an Anunnaki-Ner period, something that they influenced, is 600 years in antiquity called a great year. With Alexander of Macedon becoming Alexander the Great, we have the Western ascendancy over the East. Nibiru remains in the inner system for 60 years. In 271 BC, in the reign of Ptolemy Philadelphus of the Macedonian dynasty of Egypt, something totally eclipsed the planet Venus. For this to occur, with Venus the brightest star in the sky, so close to Earth, an object of great size had to have been transited between them. This ends the 792-year orbit of Nibiru, as it departs the system for 732 years, going back toward the dark star. Nibiru returns after 732 years to begin its 60-year perihelion period. In the first year, 462 AD, entering the system, there are really no records, but something of significance did happen. The statue of Zeus, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, is destroyed by fire after being moved to Constantinople. Now, Nibiru is in the system for 60 years, and its final year is 522 AD. The 792-year orbit is complete. Earthquakes devastate Olympia. In Greece, sky dragons were seen over Britain, a celestial war of monsters, raining great drops of blood followed by a dearth. But this could have been the Phoenix phenomenon, because this is the only year in all of recorded history that both the Phoenix object and the Nibiru object are visiting the inner system at the same time. Now, during the reign of Octa of Kent in this year, a strange star appeared over Winchester, attached to a ray that turned to flames, ending in a dragon. 522 was the beginning of the Dark Age, when written records became very scarce. For the past 40 years of Nibiru's 60 years in the inner system, a terrible drought ended the 500-year-old Mache culture of ancient Peru. Nibiru departs the inner system for 732 years on its journey back toward the Nemesis system. In 1254, Nibiru returns, beginning its 60-year perihelion period. Now, in this year ended the Seventh Crusade, unsuccessful in liberating Jerusalem from Muslim rule. During this exact 60 years, Nibiru is in a system, while Nibiru is in the system, a conflict brewed between Scotland and England. It was exactly 60 years long. In 1254, Alexander III reigned peacefully over Scotland when trouble brewed against him. Alan Durward, joined by the Earls of March, Strathearn and Carrick, Robert de Bruce, and Alexander the Steward, kidnapped King Alexander III and Queen Margaret. Later released, they were confined again and again released. This conflict lasted 60 years until 1314, when Robert the Bruce, descendant of Robert de Bruce, delivered Scotland from English domination. These were Israelite descended peoples, and in this year was 2700 after Exodus, or 900 times 3, 2700 being 54 Jubilees. In 1998 post-exilic chronology, or 666 times 3, years since the Israelites were deported out of Israel by the Assyrians. The 60th year that the Nibiru object was in the inner solar system was the year 1314 AD. This completes the 792-year orbital period. Plague fogs, quakes, disasters in China, but over Europe is seen a great black darkness that blots out the stars. This ends the period known by European historians as the Seven Comets over Europe, which began in 1301. This was the seventh comet, a great black darkness. The Great Famine of Europe from 1314 to 1317 begins, and a 40-year period of disasters, plagues, and famines worldwide kills a third of the global population, resulting in the Black Death Plague that finally ends in the year 1347. This is the second historical period for which we have records that claims that the 1/3 of the entire world was killed at the appearance of an object in the sky, and this object in both instances, 3439 BC and now 1314, is on the 792-year orbit of the Nemesis X object, which we are referring to as Nibiru. After 60 years in the inner system, again the Nemesis X object returns to the outer system, going back toward the fallen day star for 732 years. Its aphelion period, the point furthest away from the surface of the sun, is the year 1680, before it begins returning back. Now 732 years after 1314 AD, we finally arrive to the date, 2046. Nibiru enters the inner system beginning its 60-year perihelion period, remarkably to the year 2106 AD, which is the 6,000th year from year 1 of the pre-flood world, 3895 BC, when the vapor canopy was created by the Phoenix phenomenon. Now, in 2046, Nibiru appears, but in the Revelation apocalyptic record, it is called wormwood in the Apocalypse text, and a third of humanity is killed, just as in 3439 BC and in 1314 AD. Now, the Anunnaki invasion of Earth, which is described bodily in the Revelation prophecies, begins in 2046. This is the invasion of the locust beings that are found in the Apocalypse record. And of course, we know they're not locusts. These are symbols, because they wear armor, they hold weapons, and they have humanoid faces. Nibiru enters the system and stays here for 60 years during the entire apocalyptic period and post-apocalyptic period. To 2106, this completes the 792-year orbit, which has remained true all the way back to 3439 BC, with the first appearance in the historical record of the Anunnaki, Enoch, and Enki. Now, as I said, this is the 6,000th year from 3895 BC that serves as the ancient world's year 1, marking the year that a major pole shift resets civilizations back to the 0 point. This 3895 BC global lithospheric displacement, rearranging the coasts and continents, slipping entire land masses beneath the seas, is the reason why in 3439, when the Anunnaki arrived, they found a human race living no different than animals, according to the Sumerian records and archaeological evidence. There was no civilization, there was no culture. When the Anunnaki arrived, it had been 456 years since the 3895 BC pole shift that had ended every civilization on the planet, that had created a new heavens and a new earth and a vapor canopy world. This orbital chronology is the subject matter of my book, Anunnaki Homeworld, published in 2011, in its data pack sequel, Nostradamus and the Planets of Apocalypse. I have here provided the orbital history of Nibiru, but we have much ground to cover before we conclude all the evidence that has been amassed. My own books are packed with extensive bibliographies because I believe that all source materials need to be honored, and that all who read my conclusions see for themselves that I invent no dates to support a theory that the dates were already published in works preceding my own. Thus, the Nemesis X object returns in 2046, and that's where we have to stop to better understand why 2046 is the exact date and exactly what will happen when that year comes. We will now have to show you the astonishing knowledge of the Mayan long count calendar and the prophecies that are attached to it. The mass media wanted you to believe that that the Mayan long count ended in 2012, and the TV shows, documentaries, YouTube videos, and even the blockbuster movie 2012 never mentioned that the entire calendar to the Maya was a countdown to the fulfillment of a very detailed, specific prophecy important to the Mayan people, what it concerns about our world. The media censorship and cover-up about 2046 is not merely a human phenomenon, but extends into the spiritual realm as well. In our prior Anunna Files video, we revealed how deceitful entities began a disinformation campaign in 1962 called Cosmic Awareness. Now pay attention to this. In the 20th century, people employing channeling believed themselves to be in contact with extraterrestrial beings that referred to themselves as the Pleiadians. These beings conveyed misinformation that ancient disasters, including the Great Flood, were all caused by a massive comet with a 575.5-year orbit called the Destroyer. These Pleiadians attempted to convince their listeners that the last time the Destroyer had been in the inner system close to Earth was the year 1680. A deliberate lie, not merely untrue, but the direct opposite of the truth. The Destroyer in ancient records, as we've shown, was Phoenix, which caused the Great Deluge, the vapor canopy collapse. The year 1680 is not random nor insignificant. These entities claim the Destroyer was present in the inner system in the year 1680, but the truth is that in the 732 years that the Nemesis X object Nibiru was in the outer solar system, the exact year 1680 marks Nibiru's aphelion. The aphelion is its furthest distance away from the sun. These so-called Pleiadians told people the exact opposite of the truth. Had this 575.5-year orbit and 1680 date been believed and made popular today, then humanity would be totally caught by surprise in 2046, thinking they still had 209 years remaining before the Destroyer returned in the year 2255 AD. These facts demonstrate that this Nibiru chronology of 792 years is true, that the agents of the similacrum, from human editors of very prestigious modern scientific periodicals to even unseen demonic entities, do not want you to know about 2046. Over the years, I have come in contact with other authors who have sent me material, or researchers, people on the internet, who have sent me chronological material from authors that present very, very persuasive theories. But my litmus test is this. If they can't show me in their calculations that they have accounted for the day that the world turned backwards, then their chronological conclusions are in error. And that's what this video is about. I'm going to educate you on something no one else is talking about. All the prophetic timelines from Christian eschatologists, the interpretations of the different ancient calendars of the world and how they relate to us today means nothing. So many chronologists and chronographers from the ancient past were wrong because they didn't take this into account. But we have so many historical records concerning this event. It is shocking to me that in the year 2021, that me, an ex-convict, is unveiling this for the public. It has to be known by somebody. But they're not publishing it, so I'm going to do it for them. Sir Isaac Newton assures us that the 360-day year was the only one known to the ancient Israelites, that they brought it out of Egypt, that it was official ancient Egyptian calendar, that at the temple of Osiris the priests ceremoniously filled 360 bowls of milk a year. For this reason, the ancient world only knew a 360-day year. An analysis of the Genesis text in the flood story demonstrates that the year was only 360 days, 5 months being 150 days. The 360-day year mirrored the 360 degrees of the stellosphere, a fact recognized by the early Hebrews in Sanskrit, Brahmanic, and Hindu writings by the Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Egyptians, and even the Romans. Now, Plutarch, writing that in the reign of Romulus, the first king of Rome, the year was 360 days. Even Pliny the Elder admits that the ancient Athenians knew the year to be 360 days. Emanuel Velikovsky, in Worlds of Collision 1950, shows that the Vedic texts of India record an older 360-day year. The Celsius wrote that Babylon's 360 furlong long walls was the same as the 360 days of the year, that the Assyrian decade was 3,600 days, or 10 periods of 360 days each. And the Egyptian Ebers papyrus maintained a year of 360 days. The ancient Mayan calendar, both the Temple of the Cross calendar and the better-known long count, were constructed of periods divisible by the Mayan ton. A ton is 360 days. The long count is 13 Baktun, Baktun being 144,000 days, or 400 years of 360 days each. It began in 3113 BC. The Vedic Yuga ages of ancient India were also comprised of periods all divisible by 360 days. We are presently in the Kali Yuga, the Black Age, which is 432,000 days, or 1,200 years of 360 days each. So here we have traditions, ancient records, testimonies of historic writers, and mathematic construction of the earliest calendars, all supporting the fact that the year was for millennia recorded and observed to be 360 days. So what happened? And why is it relevant to the Anunna files and the coming apocalyptic period? The answer to these questions is shocking. Excuse me, I'm still a little sick, guys. Okay, then in the reign of Romulus of Rome, something very unusual happened. The months of the calendar became confused, according to Plutarch, and the people invented monthly systems in an effort to keep to a year of 360 days. This record reveals that the length of the year had changed. Amazing confirmation of this calendrical change comes from the fact that Roman records cite that in the reign of Numa, I believe his name is Numa Pompilius, this being his third year of reign, he changed the calendar in Rome from 360 days to 365.25, beginning the civil year, and he started it January 1st, a total change in the calendar. Now, Sir Isaac Newton relates that the Egyptian Thebans added 5 days to the old calendar. Velikovsky relates that the Persians added 5 days to the calendar, the Gotha days, or bad luck days. These additional 5 days were the Nemontimini in ancient Mexico, or useless days. Also in the ancient American Inca king Inti Capac Yupanqui, after a disaster, ordered that a new calendar be instituted, new astronomical observations be made, changing the calendar from 360 days to 365 days a year. In the Far East, the Chinese calendar too changed from 365 days. Interestingly, Jewish tradition of King Hezekiah of Jerusalem also said that he altered the calendar and he was the king that was alive at this time. Now, the whole world does not change their timekeeping systems in the same time unless something very significant occurred that was universally experienced. And something, in fact, did happen. A major event not taught in schools, university, or our history books. It is a very centered event. In the year 713 BC, the son of Sargon II, King Sennacherib of Assyria, came against Jerusalem. King Hezekiah was afraid and consulted the prophet Isaiah, this being his 14th year of reign. In the temple, the prophet told the king not to worry, for God would send a blast upon the Assyrians, and Jerusalem would be saved. Though Sennacherib would escape, he would be killed in his own land. As the Assyrian army approached, something in the sky changed. The sun stopped. And then the sun moved backwards, a whole 10 degrees arc across the sky. This 713 BC event has 185,000 Assyrian soldiers vaporized, precisely dated by biblical chronologist Stephen Jones in The Secrets of Time. Bible margins in the year 1890 accurately dated the sun retrograding phenomenon in 713 BC. James Ussher's chronology is again precise in his dating of the sun retrograding 10 degrees in the year 713 BC and the 185,000 Assyrians vaporized in 713 BC. The sun standing still is an event remembered well in the archives, traditions of the ancient myths of the world, many recalling how it reversed its course across the sky. Lucius Piso, in his annals, wrote that King Numa Pompilius called lightning down from heaven through an incantation. This lightning from heaven caused the death of the 185,000 Assyrians, an event also mentioned by the Babylonian historian priest Berosus. The account of Sennacherib approaching Egypt, having his entire army destroyed by a plague or blast from the sky, is found in the Histories by Herodotus, 450 BC. These are by far not the only records, but in my effort to keep these videos as short as possible, I've opted not to cite them all. But it's a very intriguing historical event been left censored. So what happened? The blast from heaven was an immense electromagnetic friction. It caused a flux tube that vaporized the 185,000 Assyrian soldiers that opposed Jerusalem. 185,000 men in armor with their gear and weapons were a perfect antenna. The Judeans later visited the spot and discovered that the entire host had been vaporized in their armor, and they received dignitaries from Babylon requesting to know if their own temple records had anything at all to say about such an event occurring in the past. That's highly dubious. It's an embellishment, but still. The flux tube energy discharge is no longer theoretical. It was observed and documented in the year 1994 when astronomers watched massive electrical discharges between the comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 and Jupiter before the comet broke apart into 21 pieces and slammed into the surface of Jupiter. This is an event that we have recorded, we have videoed, you can Google it. A flux tube has been seen. Immanuel Velikovsky noted that long ago, prior to the 8th century BC, the planet Venus was much closer to the Earth. Its horns, or its phases, clearly seen and recorded. But Mars was an insignificant red star. Then in the 8th century BC, Venus became far away. At the same time, Mars became suddenly prominent in the sky. This occurred in 713 BC, according to Velikovsky. Texts of the old world lose interest in Venus, and now the focus is on Mars. This is fascinating, for Velikovsky claimed that Venus was priorly closer to Earth, followed by Mars coming closer to Earth, and he believed it was these two separate planets that moved, for which the scientific community ridiculed him in the 1950s and 1960s, and deservedly so. I love Velikovsky, but Venus and Mars, both moving in proximity to Earth, violates Occam's razor, that the simplest solution is the most likely one. It was Earth that moved in 713 BC away from Venus and closer to Mars. This was due to the proximity of an unknown object that stopped and reversed Earth's rotation, and the resulting electrical friction vaporized the Assyrian army. Earth was now slightly further from the sun, adding 5.25 days to the 360-day year. Remember, from our prior videos, according to the Titius Bode distribution of the planets, Venus and Mars belong where they are, but Earth is an intruder planet. We mathematically should not be where we are. Our world was moved, not Venus and Mars, is evidenced by the research published in 1949, showing that scientists discovered on Attic and Etruscan art the magnetic polarity of Earth had been changed in the 8th century BC. Amazing. While the biblical account of the Jewish redactionist contains embellishments, having the reader believe that the Assyrian army was destroyed by God to defend Jerusalem when they were actually on their way to Egypt, and that Babylon would actually send dignitaries to Jerusalem to ask him what their ancient records in the temple were when it wasn't even an old temple. It's ridiculous. These are Jewish embellishments, but they still fill in a lot of detail about what happened at that time period. Sennacherib himself had boasted to Hezekiah of Jerusalem that not even God himself could deliver them out of the hands of Assyria. The Assyrian Annals of Sennacherib confirms the biblical record that King Hezekiah did not surrender, nor was he taken. This is interesting. These are Assyrian cuneiform texts now. As to King Hezekiah, he did not submit to my yoke. I laid siege to 46 of his strong cities, walled forts, and to the countless small villages in their vicinity, and conquered them by means of well-stamped earth ramps and battering rams. I drove out 200,150 people. Himself, I made a prisoner in his own city of Jerusalem. Sennacherib's assassination is also confirmed in Assyrian records of his youngest son, Esarhaddon, who succeeded him. Esarhaddon was the father of the famous Ashurbanipal, a scholar king who boasted that he was trained on how to interpret the writings from before the flood. Now, Assyrian cuneiform inscriptions mention the beginning of a new world age in the days of Sargon II. This was the well-documented Phoenix phenomenon in the year 721 BC. Like India and China, the Assyrians held that world ages ended and began with cataclysmic basically disruptions of heaven and earth. These records declare the start of another world age in the days of his son Sennacherib. The Assyrian records admit two spectacular celestial events as occurring back to back in the reigns of Father and Son. Now, the Phoenix destruction was only 8 years before, in the year 721. This is why, when the Egyptians modified their calendar, adding 5.25 days in the end of the 360-day year, they dedicated those 5 days to Osiris, Isis, Horus, Typhon, which is Phoenix, and Typhon's wife, Nephthys, which is Phoenix backwards, according to Isaac Newton, who had studied this. There was no cause to dedicate the last 2 of the newly added 5 days to Phoenix and its daughter, follower or progeny, unless the Egyptians also recognized back-to-back changes in the heavenly order. So the added days in the Egyptian calendar were of the sun, the moon, the son of the sun, of Phoenix, and a Phoenix consort. 713 BC, change of the Egyptian calendar. So we have here a forgotten historical event that lengthened the days of the solar calendar. There was an apparent period of instability because it took years to change the calendar to an exact 365.25 days. But why is all this relevant? Scholars have erred in calculating the Mayan long count calendar by the vague year system of 365.25 days a year, thinking that the longevity of the world had always been measured with this same annual unit. The entire mathematical predicate of the Mayan system demands a year of 360 days, or the arithmetic is corrupted. Without considering this and without taking into consideration in 713 BC that the calendar was changed, the scholars have devised a Mayan end date in 2012, which is exactly 34 years off of the true end date when time will collapse, according to the ancient Mayan prophecies. When Earth's orbit is altered in 2046 at the Passover of Nibiru. The fact that nothing happened in 2012 is evidence that the modern interpretation of the Mayan long count is wrong. It's a prophetic countdown to when Earth will be moved out of its place. Hey guys, this is the 26th and not the final Anunna Files video. The Mayan long count calendar, it's impossible. What we know of the ancient Vedic, Brahmanic, Sumerian, and Mayan Olmec calendars can't be possible with a worldview as taught to us today. It would have required sophisticated computer software to design these calendars. But according to the modern paradigm, computers didn't exist 4,500 years ago. But what we're going to see in this video is beyond explanation. High technology did exist in the ancient times. There was a very definitive reason why the earliest calendrical systems, the only unit of time important to them was a day. It's because they knew that the year could be broken. It could be changed. But the turning of our stellosphere, which gives us the day and night time by which we record time, no matter if it's lunar or solar reckoning, has everything to do with how the ancients prophesied future events. Very intriguing video. And guys, I am back. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm gaining my weight back. I feel great. My voice is coming back. I got hit in the throat many, many years ago. Many years ago in a fight, I got hit in the trachea. I had a brace on for like 4 months. This is the reason why. I've never really shared this with any of you. This is really the reason why my voice is the way it is. I cannot hear me the way you do. I've been told many times my voice is very deep. I've been told many times that sometimes it sounds fake. You don't realize, I mean, in prison sometimes the guy didn't mean to hit me in the throat. As a matter of fact, in the joint, we have protocols, we have rules by which we fight, and there is unfair fighting, and you can get other people involved that will actually beat your ass if you kick somebody in the nuts or something like that. But we were fighting in the dark, and somebody hit me in the throat. Almost killed me. And since then, I've had issues with my vocal cords but anyway, I don't even try to talk about prison. Screw prison. I'm talking about the Anunna Files in this video and the next video. 2 videos being released tonight, maybe 3 if you're lucky. But I don't want to take up too much time. I just want to convey that what I'm revealing in this video isn't really possible if we stick to the paradigms that we've been taught. You're going to have to unlearn some things to understand. But this video is very comprehensive. Don't have to make anything up. It's all verifiable. This is Jason from Archaix.com, and enjoy this presentation. The Mayan long count is a misnomer. It's not even from the Maya. It has been discovered that the Maya merely preserved this ancient calendar from the Olmeca. The discovery of a jade figurine with a calendar inscribed upon its stomach indicates to scholars that the date 3113 BC, showing that this unique calendrical system antedated the Maya and every other archaic American system, spanning back to at least 1200 BC. Jean Reinhardt in Science Digest, September 1967, wrote that it is a masterpiece of mathematical knowledge, and it was the Olmeca, not the Maya, who developed it. Again, they're the only one more discovery away from finding that the Olmecs didn't even develop it either. It's older. This 3113 BC date was 260. It was the 260th year of the Olmec calendar, or 52 times 5. The entire length of the long count was 5,200 years that were 360 days each, or 52 times 100. 52 seems to be the ancient American number for cycles of apocalypse. 52 and its variants 13 and 26, they are found all over the Aztec calendar stone called the Stone of the Fifth Sun, which is an apocalypse countdown. Now, using scientific data obtained from a convention of archaeologists, astrophysicists, botanists, and historians who convened in 1997, Frank Joseph demonstrates in his research that in the year 3113 BC, a single or series of comet meteorite impacts devastated North America, causing global quakes, temperature and climate changes, drought, and blanketing of cosmic dust. His conclusion is that the cataclysm began the Mayan long count calendar. This aligns perfectly with our thesis, which demonstrates that a cataclysm will also end the Mayan long count. Now, 3113 BC was the year 782 Annus Mundi of the Old World's calendar, start date of the Mayan long count calendar, the most startling calendrical system from the ancient world, and the most miscalculated and misunderstood. So much disinformation has been published about the Mayan system that even scholars have been led to believe the calendar ended in 2012, which is an impossibility. The pre-flood people were extremely advanced chronologists and knew more about the last days than we do. The future judgments and countdown until then were always measured in days, not years. As found numerous times in the cuneiform tablets of the Sumerians and other ancient Near East cultures, time was reckoned by the passage of days. Even the future apocalypse was known as the last days, not the last years. The Atrahasis epic, the first recorded element of time measurement in Genesis, was the evening and the morning was the first day. The correction of this error allowed us to see that the Anunnaki descended not 432,000 years before the flood, but 432,000 days, being just a 1,200-year period from 3439 BC and the deluge in 2239 BC. This 1,200-year period has been found in Vedic and Puranic texts as 1,200 years and also mentioned as 432,000 days, which is proof that they are one and the same time period. The archaic Dutch Oralin text reads that during the pre-flood world, the years were not counted. Now, the start of the Mayan calendar in 3113 BC to the year the calendar itself would be broken in 713 BC, which is the subject of our last Anunna Files video, is 864,000 days, when 360 years became 365.25. The Mayan long count is precisely 1,872,000 days in length, being 13 Baktuns, each Baktun being 144,000 days. On the 1,872,000th day, according to the Maya, time would collapse. The date referred to as 130000. It was careless scholarship that resulted with the false end date of 2012. Accurately interpreting the long count requires that we employ the 360-day period of the Maya, which was called a ton, being the basis for Mayan prophetic timekeeping. Zechariah Sitchin noted that the three methods of calculating the long count all related to the arbitrary number of 360, but it wasn't arbitrary. It was the length of the ancient year, prior to 713 BC. Despite this revelation, the Sumerian scholar calculated the Mayan calendar under the corrupted 365.25 year. He is not alone, because scholarship ignores solid archaeological and textual evidence that Earth's orbit was dynamically altered in the year 713 BC, when all the calendars of the ancient world, from China to the Americas, changed. The calculation of the 1,872,000 days under the wrong solar year of 365.25 days corrupted the end date to be in 2012, abbreviating the perfect 5,200 years of the Mayan long count of 360 days each to 5,125 years. The chronologists and astronomers around the world in 713 BC added 5 evil days to the end of their calendars to compensate for the change. The entire system has been calculated under the 365.25 year, when the 365.25 year calculation is only good for years after 713 BC, cataclysm that altered the solar year from 360 days. Prior to 713 BC, the 365.25 year was unknown to the ancients. There's not a single historical reference to it. Now, 13 Mayan Baktuns beginning at 3113 BC is an astonishing study. 2713 BC ends the first Baktun. 144,000 days under the 360-day year is done. The next Baktun, the second Baktun, is complete. 288,000 days in 2313 BC. The third Baktun, 432,000 days, is finished in 1913 BC. The fourth Baktun, complete in 1513 BC. That is 576,000 days, which is 144,000 times 4. The fifth Baktun, still easy to calculate, is 720,000 days, 144,000 times 5, completed in the year 1113 BC. Now, the sixth Baktun is complete in 713 BC. It is the ancient year 3182 Annus Mundi. Sixth Baktun complete at 864,000 days. This is amazing. 864,000 days. To the mystics and in the Kabbalah and many other ancient Middle Eastern and Middle Age texts, 864 is the foundation of time number, as clearly seen in many historic records. In 713 BC, a very dark object passes too close to Earth, and a flux tube incinerates 185,000 Assyrian soldiers on their way to Egypt. This was the 864,000th day since the beginning of the Mayan long count calendar. A cataclysm alters Earth's orbital distance from the sun enough to add 5.25 days to the year. The Baktuns were 400 years exactly, but now they are changed to 394.5 years due to the lengthening of the time it takes Earth to get around the sun. 5.25 days were added to every single year. The number 864 links time and space and is the most important of all calendrical numbers. It is the mathematical nexus between all the world's calendrical systems based off of the numbers 6, 12, and 144. A golden proportion number. In time and space, it relates to the movement of the Earth. Here is the proof. 1 day is 86,400 seconds. 60 days is 86,400 minutes. 360 days is 8,640 hours. 24 years is 8,640 months. Hours, 72 years, a precessional degree, is 864 months. The sum of 864 is 432 plus 432, or 144 times 6, or 108 times 8. All of these being very powerful mystic numbers in the East. As the Earth orbits the Sun every 864 years, the zodiac retrogrades 12 degrees in the cycle of precession, a degree being 72 years. 11 degrees is 792 years. This occurs as Earth travels along the ecliptic plane at 66,600 miles per hour around the Sun. The Sun's radius is 432,000 miles, giving it a diameter of 864,000 miles. Remember, this is the mathematics of the similacrum. These facts cannot be actually true because in the physics that we have been taught, it's impossible to maintain this precision over centuries of time. It's impossible. But it happened. Now, Because of the size of the sun, the size of the earth, and the distance between them, the dark shadow behind the earth pointing away from the sun, called the umbra, always points away from the sun at a distance of 864,000 miles. The umbra is the region of total shadow, unlike the penumbra, which is partial shadow. Other researchers have ascertained that the Great Pyramid represents geometrically the northern hemisphere to a scale of 1 in 43,200. Which represents 1/2 of 86,400. Again, 864. By studying the architecture of the Great Pyramid, researchers were able to determine how long the royal cubit was. They discovered that the unit of measurement to lay out the monument would measure the circumference of the earth out of 86,400,000 cubits. Now we continue with our Baktun, but our system now is 394.5 years for a Baktun, because that's how long 144,000 days are, the tons of the Mayan long count. So we arrive at 319 BC, which is the end of the 7th Baktun, which is 1,008,000 days. There's the number 108 again. The 8th Baktun is complete in the year 76 AD. In 76 AD, which is the year 4364 Annus Mundi, it is 1,296,000 days of the Mayan long count. It is 9 times 144,000. And then the 10th Baktun, and remember, 10 is the number of tetrachus. This is the number of completion in many ancient occult systems. Here we have the 10th Baktun completing at 1,444,000 days in the year 864 Anno Domini. This is amazing. It's absolutely astonishing. The Anno Domini calendar wasn't even created till the year 526 AD. It's a calendar that was created in retrospect. But in the Mayan system, now recalibrated to account for the cataclysm in 713 BC that ended the 360-day year and began the 364.5-day year, which abbreviated the Mayan Baktuns of 144,000 days from 400 actual solar years to 394.5 years, we arrive at 864 Anno Domini, 864 being again the foundation of time. We are looking at the coding of a program from inside the similacrum. This can't be real. It's too perfect. Now, the synchronization of 864 Anno Domini calendar is another piece of evidence that the calendars of the world, though often unrelated, were instituted by intelligent design. 864 is again the foundation of time number in many occult systems, including the rabbinical and Hebraic. The 11th Baktun is now 1,584,000 days. It is 5152 Annus Mundi. Not an insignificant number. The year is 1258 AD. This is the Annus Mundi year 5152, which parallels the exterior angle of the Great Pyramid's 51.52 degree angle, formerly found in the perfect limestone casing blocks that numbered 144,000. Again, this is astonishing. In the 12th Baktun, 1,728,000 days of the Mayan long count is complete. 12 Baktuns are done in the year 1652 AD. Now, the 13th Baktun, it finds its completion. 1,872,000 days, 13 Baktun. Mayan year 130000 is our year 2046. The Mayan calendar is complete with the 13th Baktun. The ancient world was divided between 12 regions, but the Americas were then unknown, being the 13th region, the origin of the Maya. The Maya were 13 clans living under the 13 heavens who originally lived in North America before they migrated to Central America. In 2046, the civilization of North America will be absolutely obliterated by a disaster. The United States, which began as 13 colonies of Britain, a people racially and spiritually descended from the 13 tribes of Israel, that find their ultimate origin in Egypt through Ephraim, the tribe of adoption, adopting all foreign people to what the United States became today. The Mayan calendar is about the collapse of time. Mayan prophecy holds that at the end of the 13th Baktun, the god Bolan Yokti will descend, a vessel of the 7 gods. Not only do we exist within a mathematic construct, once we comprehend its structure, we can see the tapestry of past and future events. In 1918, through Europe and Asia, an epidemic killed 20 million people at the end of World War I, which in itself resulted in millions of casualties. This was 128 years after the 1790 discovery of the Aztec stone of the fifth sun, the calendar stone. The Aztec relic depicts the day of four movement as a pyramid with crossed bars and an eye above it. This day, called four movement, marks the time in the future when a terrible disaster will occur. The crossed bars are a symbol for older Mesoamerican cultures that refer to a passage of an age when a calendar is complete. Incredibly, this image on the Aztec artifact reflects what David Davidson, an engineer in 1924, discovered in the geometry of the Great Pyramid's base diagonals, which are crossed bars, that provided him the date of 2045 for the termination of the astronomical chronology encoded within the Great Pyramid, as explained in Anunnaki Homeworld, my own book, When Earth's Orbit Will Change. David Davidson knew nothing about the Anunnaki, never mentioned him, knew nothing about this thesis or the year 2046. The Aztec calendar stone is full of artistic imagery, and archaeologists have discovered that 5 of the animals depicted upon the gigantic relic are not from Mexico at all, but indigenous to the Mayan country. The Aztecs, so late in history, merely inherited what had been preserved by the Maya, who in turn inherited their sciences and prophecy from the older Olmeca. In 1790, the modern world found the Aztec prophecy stone, and now, counting 128 years after 1918, is 2046. Here is a perfect isometric projection for those of you who have been following my other posts on Ophis and Gameseer concerning the predictive value of isometric projective analysis. In 2046, the calendars will be changed because the movement of the sky will be altered, thus changing the length of the year and the length of the day. A new age will begin as an epidemic kills millions, and North and Central America are destroyed. The Mayan origin was North America. Relic depicts cataclysmic event. This cataclysm will cause an amazing discovery at the Great Pyramid or within it. The seer Edgar Cayce made a profound statement in the year 1932 when he was specifically asked about the Great Pyramid. Concerning this monument, he said, "It received all the records from the beginning of that given by the priests, to that period when there is to be a change in the earth's position." This is similar to the statement by Nostradamus concerning heavy visions of the future. I shall know different times. As Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed from the sky, vitrified and vaporized in the year 1849 BC, as shown in the 510-page chronicon free on my website, archaix.com, which was the year 2046 Annus Mundi, or of the Old World Calendar, so also is the new Sodom, the United States, destroyed from the sky exactly in the 2046th year of the modern world's calendar, the Anno Domini. Immanuel Velikovsky put it best. It would be a miracle indeed if all these coincidences were purely accidental. Anyone familiar with the theory of probabilities knows that with every additional coincidence, the chances for another grow smaller. So in 2046, we have learned in the Anunna Files videos that Nemesis X object transits in 2046, and Earth-ish is basically shoved off of the ecliptic plane to return to the Nemesis ecliptic at 23.5 degrees, but orbiting in a tighter solar orbit. Our years will become 240 days, and the days will become 16 hours long, as described in the Revelation text. This is the quickening. In 2 Esdras 5:4 of the apocryphal text, we read that the sun will appear and shine at night, and the moon will appear 3 times in the day. Women will give birth to children in 3 and 4 months, and rivers will not flow for 3 hours. This change of the Earth's position, it will totally alter human biology. Welcome to part 27 of the Anunna Files. Now, the first 26 parts, many of you were introduced to entirely new concepts that you have never identified as being related to Anunna and Anunnaki studies. So, I want to return to some basics, although provide more information in this video. We have to understand that basically by modern authors, we've been hoodwinked. The The sensationalist claims of Zecharia Sitchin and many of his followers, they're just not justified. They're not found in the historical record. They're not found in the archaeological record. They're not found in the traditional record. They're modern day inventions, pretty much postulated by 2, 3, or 4 people and picked up by hundreds and believed by millions. Now, I've been called many things. There are people who are very unhappy with some of my Anunna files, but that's okay. I'm not here to please anybody. I'm here to disseminate the truth as best as I found it. Now, I have found that many records from antiquity are very racial. Not so much with racial animus, but they are focused on race and on race wars and on what was going on in the ancient world between races. And when I cite these sources, I am being labeled as racist and someone who is trying to push an agenda, and I'm not. But I'm not here to defend the Anunna files or defend even the architecture of my personality, who I am. I don't care what you believe. I'm here to convey the information that other people won't. So enjoy this video. This is Legacy of Sumer. We have inherited from Sumer far more than you may know. Now, the women and thieves of Greece 25 centuries ago used to sing in strange ways hard to know God's come to men. Not much has changed since those times. 4,000 years ago thrived a mysterious people in the early Near East, a single civilization that linked all the cultures of the world together in a chain of archives reaching far back into the ancient past. You know who the people I'm talking about. All the people in the world were considered their colonies, for they alone were the descendants of those who had survived the Great Flood, or so they had thought. They were called the people of An in Sumer, a land which denotes that they regarded themselves as having been divinely guarded, the land of the guardians. Unlike any other people, the Sumerians maintained a vast amount of records concerning history from the times preceding this cataclysm. In fact, the majority of antediluvian accounts from all epics and sources, including the biblical records, all have distinct Sumerian parallels. The explosion of knowledge in archaic Sumer has baffled historians only because they refuse to take into account that the records left behind by these incredible people were never meant to be taken as mere legends and folklore, but as truth. Like a syllabus. These writings on clay and stone tablets tell of a world teeming with people, of expansive cities and civilizations, great infrastructures, agriculture, huge animals, mighty kings and wars, achievements and failures, technologies and wisdom, and a distant and obscure god that grew displeased with the other deities and their forbidden terrestrial affairs among men. The antediluvian records of the Sumerians initially tell of a great, fantastic golden age setting, a paradise world where humankind enjoyed the benevolence of heaven. But this age ended with the appearance of a group of strange divinities that took up residence among them over 5,000 years ago, impregnating their women and fathering a race of gigantic people that provoked the Creator to destroy the world. Hundreds of years after this flood, many families and groups migrated from Sumer, taking their memories with them. As the population swelled and irrigation on the Euphrates diverted more and more of the water supply, these people established Babylonia, Assyria, Anatolia, Egypt, Elam, Mohenjo-Daro, and India. As these areas also grew, more colonies appeared. They pretty much re-inhabited the ruinous stone cities left from the pre-flood peoples. The Sumerians gave birth to 2 foundational ideologies that find their roots in the antediluvian world. 2 distinct belief systems that were carried from Sumer 4,000 years ago and spread all over the world. The older of the 2 was a belief that one day the golden age of mankind would return and that the Creator would again destroy this creation. Fundamental belief. And again, he would act as their guardian and preserve them through it. This motive has strong biblical ties, which is not a mystery since the Hebrews record that their ancestors were the Babylonians, who were the direct descendants of Sumer. The second and far more popular ideology of post-flood Sumer was the belief in the return of the mysterious and arcane divinities that descended from the heavens long ago and dwelt among their ancestors. This is the message of the book of Revelation. Now, because of this second faith captured the minds of the people, those holding to more monotheistic traditions departed Sumer early on. They kept to the elder ways passed down from the patriarchs, separating themselves from the masses who had invested their hopes and all their efforts on the return of those celestial beings. Their belief of a future and holy Savior was replaced with a religion that involved a pantheistic kingdom that would descend from the stars to rule among men as terrestrial gods that could be visually seen and consulted. In this way, they eliminated the need for any distant and unseen God, a creator. This belief system was not based on ancestral teachings and prophecies as was the first, but on an actual historical occurrence. The Sumerian king list reads, when kingship was lowered from heaven, kingship was first at Eridu. And after the flood had swept over the earth, and when kingship was lowered again from heaven, kingship was first in Kish. Eridu was the Sumerian paradise, the biblical Garden of Eden in the land of Eden that mankind was prevented from entering before the flood. After this deluge, the record here indicates that the Sumerian city of Kish is the site where the kingship descended. Interestingly, this city later became the center of religious reforms when it was taken from Sumer by Sargon I and turned into an Akkadian city. The Akkadians, like the Chaldeans, Babylonians, and Assyrians, quickly assumed their own unique cultures and traits, but their notions of celestial kingship remained distinctly Sumerian. Excuse me. The institution of divine kingship is amazingly depicted upon a Sumerian pillar excavated from Ur that exhibits a winged figure descending from heaven to pour water into the cup of a king. This iconography best unveils the early faith of the Sumerians in the kingship. As divine beings, it was their service to man to provide those things that their ancestors had lost. Remember this. The water of life poured from heaven is represented in the Bible as the Edenic tree of life that early man was banished from. Though a member of the kingship, this winged figure is referred to as an angel. Also, these winged figures are found on the Gate of the Sun in Tiwanaku in South America's ruins. And according to the Pictorial Encyclopedia of the Bible, the earliest archaeological evidence of angels to date appears on the stele of Ur-Nammu, circa 2000 BC, where angels are seen flying over his head in prayer. These angelic beings were thought to have come from the stars. In Sumerian inscriptions, a god is represented by a star glyph called a dingir, which also means God. This glyph was universal in application, used by Babylon, Assyria, the Hittites, Egyptians, Canaanites, Persians, and even ancient American scribes in their representations of a god in a text or relief. The Sumerian faith in the kingship was based upon a rich history of oral and written traditions concerning those distant times from before the flood. Distorted by the passage of time, histories became to convey that these once ominous gods would bring about the future return of paradise. The two religious vantage points of the early Sumerians finally merged into a singular faith that paved the way for the actual return of these beings that anciently masqueraded as gods. Two disparate belief systems merged into one. And golden plates from the city of Ur have been found, and they read, "Gods in the form of men came down." These gods were thought to have been sent by Anu, god of heaven and ruler among the stars. To the Sumerians, Earth was called Ki, later to become regarded as a goddess like Mother Earth, Gaia. In this Near Eastern ideology, the descent of these beings from Anu to Ki was the joining of heaven to earth to produce the race that was called Anunnaki, which literally means from heaven to earth. Although Anu was the god of heaven, there was another called Enlil, Lord Wind, an obscure deity originally worshipped by the Sumerians, who is responsible for flooding the earth, and he is the greatest link between the earliest Sumerians and their Hebrew descendants who remembered him in the scriptures. This is the story of Abraham. Anu's center of worship was the city of Uruk, biblical Erech in Genesis. In Sumer, the Anunnaki were also called the great gods because of their divine parentage. They were the offspring between the kingship that descended and the females that were impregnated of the Neolithic cultures that first came into contact with these strange divinities who were just humans with their infrastructure intact. You see, the Sumerians were people just like us. They're no different. They had jobs, they had concerns, they had hobbies. The Sumerian people were no different than Americans, British, people of New Zealand, Australia, China. It's just the fish markets of Southeast Asia today have changed little since Sumerian times. There's no difference. There's really no mystery. Their records were traditions not recorded until centuries after the events occurred, sometimes as much as 1,000 years. And our concept of angelic beings, gods from the sky, comes from the Sumerians. Everything we know about God, everything we know about angels comes from the Sumerian culture. But the Sumerians recorded these things from a pre-literate period. traditions were written on stone tablets, and they were recorded for posterity. And when Sumer fragmented, these memories, which were not recorded in real time, all of a sudden became fragmented as well, and they were taken to all points of the compass. Do you follow me here? The Sumerians never witnessed these events. They recorded traditions because they happened in a pre-literate period. And when writing was developed centuries and even 1,000 years later, the Sumerians put them to writing. But there was no one in Sumer who saw these things and lived through these things. These were stories, they were traditions. But it was the Sumerians who perpetuated them, wrote them down. And when Sumer fragmented, the scribes of Elam took their copies. The scribes of the Amuru took their copies. Urartu took their copies. Harappa took their copies. Errata took their copies. Magan took their copies. The Cometians, which became the Egyptians, took their copies. Anatolia, the Hittites, took their copies. The Urians took their copies. Invaded India and spread it among the Dravidians. Sumer. This is the legacy of Sumer, the belief in beings that descended from the skies, associated to the stars, that came and impregnated human females, which gave rise to the birth of giants. This is the legacy of Sumer. We're going to explore more about this. I only have 3 videos out of over 260 that require you to read the text. There's no narration. Both of my Similacrum Chronicles videos, which are very popular right now, I have received several emails and messages, people wanting me to narrate these videos instead of reading them because they want to listen while they're doing other activities. I get that. So today, the only 3 videos that I have that require you to read, all 3 of them will be re-uploaded as they originally were. But I will be reading the text. I'm keeping the music. I'm keeping all the graphics. The only change in all 3 of these videos is that you can now hear me say it instead of read it yourself. An ancient, unknown super civilization endured for 930 years. Technologically advanced, highly developed in computing, machining, engineering, aerial flight, the building craft, and with developed philosophies. This was 7,200 years ago during the 2 suns period when there was no moon in the sky. A great sun ruled the day and a lesser sun ruled the night. Reptiles, amphibians, flora, and marine life grew to colossal sizes. They excelled in learning and discovered the harrowing truth that they existed within a simulacrum, a programmed reality. Debates raged. Research led to discoveries. They began to deconstruct the simulacrum by performing their own simulations. Uncovering the startling truth that many life forms and phenomena they took for granted were actually living fossils from prior world simulations. Their reality environment was manufactured, a holography of superimposed, simulated worlds. A minority emerged who opposed any further attempts to escape the containment, their own simulations leading to one harrowing conclusion. The simulacrum, out of self-preservation, maintained dormant cataclysm protocols to prevent escape by those that were confined within it. This minority was led by a female who predicted that the simulacrum would enact cataclysm protocols to prevent further interference. Her resistance grew to full-scale war, and she with her forces were defeated in the 600th year of the 2 suns period. Simulations continued. The defeated were policed, while the victors prepared secret facilities to enable survival when the simulacrum would retaliate. 330 years after the Great War, in the 930th year of this civilization, the simulacrum activated the Phoenix weapon. It appeared like a fiery red dragon out of the Cygnus Rift. The day star went dark. The lesser light that ruled the night as a smaller sun became the only sun in the sky. A horrendous cataclysm reset the biosphere. The ecosystem could no longer support the gigantic flora and fauna. Thousands of volcanoes, sinkholes, subsidence, and quakes changed the continent. Land masses were buried in mud from the sky, volcanic resurfacing and widespread lava flows, and new bodies of water appeared. In a 3-hour period, the simulacrum had ended 90% of all life within it. Most of the residual surviving life forms from simulations prior to the 930-year Two Suns period were now lost. For 270 years, the world was a frozen waste. The simulacrum reset was absolutely necessary. Those confined must be convinced that they live in a real world. Because escape is possible. Remnants of the victor faction survived with much of their technology intact by preparing for the Phoenix catastrophe. They waited out the destruction in deep earth biospheres, many of which became mass graves, facilities totally drowned or buried under new land surfaces. These advanced survivors came to be known as the Anunna. Other survivors on the surface were reset by the Phoenix apocalypse, Neolithic hunter-gatherers. They remembered the matriarch and her prophecy of the destruction of the world, but had forgotten their sciences and their advanced histories. The Anunna set up walled enclosures called Edens and began extensive mining for metals and quarrying for building materials. Soon they began enslaving the Neolithic populations that outnumbered them 100 to 1. In the Anunna databases were records of this 930-year period, the discoveries they made, and the activation of the Phoenix weapon. In the 270th year, the simulacrum introduced a new program simulation in the current running holography. In 4039 BC, an observatory was introduced into the sky. The moon appeared for the first time in history and caused the captured flood. Neolithic survivors by this time elevated the memory of the matriarch and her prediction of the doomsday to a goddess-venerating religion. Anunna excelled in technology while the Neolithic goddess worshippers excelled in sympathetic magic, mastering the neural link between the psyche and the simulation. Anunna mining and quarrying operations were halted in a series of disasters and widespread flooding in the year 4039 BC. The simulacrum also introduced a new programmed human type, once referred to as the egigi. Morally bankrupt, devious and cunning, hateful of every other human type, the descendants of the egigi continue today in 2020 to vex the rest of the world. The egigi disguise themselves as humans, but they are not. They pretend to be a certain people, but it's a front, misdirection. They quickly went to work against all the designs and plans of the Anunna. Since their beginning, they have always used race and culture to create divisiveness. But the Anunna and the Neolithic hunter-gatherers they ruled over possessed something the egigi nor their descendants ever had. The explosive genius of creative potential that comes from being a spiritual immortal. One contained in a simulated holography and not a mere programmed intelligence. In just 144 years after the appearance of Luna, the Anunna built a fantastic civilization that again threatened the simulacrum. The programmed holography minions, the egigi, were unable to suppress the growth and advancement of the Anunna. So in 3895 BC, the Phoenix weapon reappeared. The civilization of the Anunna was caught off guard. The majority were lost. Cities disappeared in a rain of mud that buried whole continents. Quarries and mines were abandoned. Anunna population decimated again in massive quakes and a simulated pole shift, continental destruction. The memory of this event was later commemorated as the fall of man. Eden. In the wake of the worldwide Phoenix destruction, the similacrum introduced something new, the vapor canopy. The sky had become a thick violet vapor ceiling by day, but at night, the moisture descended to saturate the ground with pools of dew, leaving the night sky dark but clear, filled with stars and a bright moon. The lunar observation construct programmed by the simulacrum to keep a close watch on human development. So to better schedule Phoenix resets and highly local disasters when needed. In 3895 BC, the reset began 1656 years of the Genesis and pre-flood world. For 456 years, the goddess prevailed in all of Asia, Africa, Europe, and the entire dry valley system of the Mediterranean before it had become a sea. Lunar and stellar zodiacs, calendars, and festivals were developed by Neolithic, smooth-skinned, dark-eyed, and dark-haired peoples. But during the same 456 years, the Anunna had vanished from the historical record. The peoples of the goddess remembered the Anunna as the gods of the ancient past. In the 456th year of the antediluvian period, a vast darkness passed across the sky and quakes caused continental flooding. 1/3 of the entire human race died in the disaster. Unknown to the matriarchy peoples of Asia, Africa, Europe, across the vast oceans, the descendants of the Anunna had built a vast civilization. In a very different North America. The Anunna were this time prepared for the simulacrum resets. Technology, historical records, and manufacturing intact, they had constructed fleets of arks and built underground survival facilities. In the 456th year of the pre-flood antiquity, the American continents were devastated by cataclysm. Many of the Anunna did not escape. Cities, bunker facilities, and arks were lost. The Americas were deemed unlivable and the remaining arks navigated to predetermined locations in the old worlds of Asia, Africa, and Europe. Some of the Anunna remained in the Americas, others landed in the British Isles to build a fantastic civilization, others settled the paradise, lush freshwater valleys of the Mediterranean and Black Seas. But the most prominent Anunna group landed their fleet at Dilmun and then entered the historical record as the Anunnaki of Sumer, venerated by the black-headed people, which was a self-Sumerian designation. Anunna bring textiles, pottery, cereals, domestic animals, medicines, chemicals, technology and engineering, masonry and carpentry, naval construction called ships that the matriarchal people had never seen. The old world traditions of bearded gods was given credence all over again with the appearance of the Anunna. The matriarchy was again threatened. But trade alliances were formed, labor agreements were conducted. The goddess found that she had to work with and not against this returned power. The people worked the quarries, mines, settlements, shipyards, granaries, orchards, fisheries, mills for the Anunna and were awarded this time with enriched lives and material increase. All about the same time, the Egyptian, Vedic, Itza, Mayan, Olmec, Chinese, and other ancient calendars began and Newgrange and Stonehenge were constructed. During their 456 years in North America, the Anunna continued to run simulations and make discoveries about the simulacrum. They continued this study in Sumer and developed a template that decoded the simulacrum's core programming, identifying its protocols and reset triggers. This template is remembered in the Sumerian texts as the Tablet of Destinies. 534 years after the landing of the Anunna fleet in the Near East, they take the Tablet of Destinies and begin a massive project for which the simulacrum has no defense. In the year 2905 BC, the Anunna began the erection of the Gate of Yaksaka, guaranteeing a future generation would be able to escape the simulacrum. And this concludes part 1 in the 990th year of the pre-flood world, 2905 BC. And in part 2, which will be released this evening, things are going to get really interesting. Brace yourself, this is part 2 of the Similacrum Chronicles. The civilization of the Anunna in 2905 BC was spread across the entire world. Crews with passengers flew in aircraft across Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. The center of Anunna activity was around the Pentapolis, the 5 cities of government. This began the Technolithic period, when sophisticated machines were used to build complex machines out of both natural and manufactured stones. By this date of 2905 BC, the Anunna scientists knew the exact windows of activity the simulacrum could activate the Phoenix weapon. They had amassed the data, and through running their own simulations, they concluded that the holographic nature of the simulacrum was of intelligent design. The world was a containment preserve that protected the outside reality from any contamination from within. The simulacrum was actually holographic coding that interfaced with DNA coding to convince those confined within that they were free and existing in a real universe. The goddess-worshipping adherents practicing sympathetic magic to induce changes in the simulacrum had actually isolated inadvertently a way to escape the simulacrum. They practiced their rituals to produce particular alterations in their personal lives, and the simulacrum reciprocated like a mirrored response. For example, the end result of a thing was conceptualized in ritual to bring about the event itself. The Anunna genius contrived a way to introduce an interference pattern so systemic through a ritual so complex that its completion would induce the simulacrum itself to adopt the newly created signal. A disguised coding taking into the holographic coding of the simulacrum itself that would be absorbed over time as if it was a part of the original source code. The Anunna mastermind was called Enki, Lord of the Earth, popularly known as Enoch, and his genius contrived a grand architectural project to build the largest, heaviest, and most complex machine ever constructed within the simulacrum. A structure so perfectly deceptive in design that the simulacrum itself was unaware of its true purpose. Enki publicly informed the other Anunna and egigi populations that this architecture was to be a monument that preserved knowledges for future generations who would descend from the survivors of a coming worldwide catastrophe. But this was only a half-truth. Enki knew by virtue of his research that the simulacrum altered its own coding to conform to or respond to mass human awareness. What the collective holds to be true, the simulacrum produces sensory evidence to support it. For this reason, Enki made public the cover story, but kept the true purpose of the project to himself. In this way, Enki pulled off the greatest deceit in world history. He became the deceiver, the trickster. He became mankind's greatest benefactor, while also demonized by the egigi agents of the simulacrum itself and their puppet priesthoods that only became aware of the deception after the Enki machine had been activated. Its effect upon the holography irreversible. What Enki did for the human race was for the benefit of all people, all races. He introduced a series of coding protocols that required the passage of millennia to infect and converge within the simulacrum's own coding algorithms undetected, layers of disguised protocols that would suddenly converge into an override program, causing the simulacrum's own defense measures to collapse itself. In this way, Enki was both the voice and architect of prophecy, able to foresee the last days because he coded it. Able, not the last days of mankind, but the end of the prison of the similacrum itself. In 2905 BC, the elite machinists, engineers, architects, surveyors, and heavy equipment operators of the Anunna began to build the Enki project. Thousands of people, and not one of them knew the true intent of the monument. They built the Great Pyramid of Giza, which was called Akuzan in rabbinical texts, on exposed basement rock foundation. For 90 years, they machine quarried the limestone and granite materials, liquefied into molds, adding geopolymers, and raised the structure 203 courses of stone to a flat-topped apex. Completed in 1,080 months, 90 years, in 2815 BC, or the pre-flood year, 1080. Every date of the simulacrum's past and future ability to activate the Phoenix weapon was cleverly encoded within the structure and followed unwittingly by the builders. So also was the hidden collapse protocols set to be activated in what translates in our present calendars as the years 2040, 2046, 2070, and 2104. 4 major simulacrum systems to initiate shutdowns on these dates for the gradual yet total freedom of the human race from this dungeon of the demiurge. The epitome of the misdirection incorporated into the Great Pyramid's design was the empty sarcophagus. This ensured that the monument would always by the collective be believed to be the intended tomb of someone great. The Giza site during construction was completely off limits to unauthorized Anunna, to all egigi, and to all other humans of every race. In the 66th year of the construction of the Great Pyramid, a group of the Anunna began a widespread crossbreeding campaign with ordinary humans in the year 2839 BC. This was exactly 600 years before the Great Deluge reset caused by the Phoenix weapon in the month of May 2239 BC. In the 76th year of the building at Giza, the Anunna decided by council that a centralized government was necessary because the human population was multiplying rapidly. The Pentapolis cities were growing rapidly. In 2829 BC, the Anunna elected Algar as the first king of the Pentapolis, better known as the first of the 7 kings of the Sumerian king list. The Great Pyramid of Giza was completed in the 14th year of this new dynasty. The Anunna sealed the monument, hiding the door beneath a veneer of 144,000 white limestone casing blocks 100 inches thick. The Anunna now allow the other races to approach the Giza site, bringing non-Anunna engineers, laborers, masons, surveyors, and they employ them in the building of the 2 lesser pyramids at Giza. Then carving out a limestone prominence into the Sphinx and the Valley of the Sphinx and Sphinx Temple. The entire layout of the Giza complex is misdirection, designed by Enki to create geometrical relationships that direct focus away from the Great Pyramid, which is at the edge of the complex, to focus on the second pyramid, which the Sphinx is positioned directly in front of. Enki had to perpetuate the deception over the entire human race in order to save them at a far future date. The deceit over humanity was further necessary to ensure the simulacrum would not realize that it had been compromised until it was too late. Having the craftsmen of their human vassals participate in the building of the other Giza pyramids further strengthened the deception. The more pyramids built, the more the simulacrum would deem them unimportant. The people did not have the full advantages of the Anunna hardware and technology, and this fact is made obvious in that no pyramids at Giza exhibit the high sophistication, laser-level tolerances, and precision of the single Great Pyramid itself. The Great Pyramid took 90 years for the Anunna to complete, and it is the only pyramid in the world with a grand gallery kings and queens chambers, which are not their actual functions, and many, many other features of the Great Pyramid are not paralleled in any other pyramids in the world. But the rest of the Giza complex took centuries to complete, humans under the supervision and apprenticeship of Anunna master craftsmen. After Giza was finished, the area was forbidden to visit. It became a holy sanctuary and became a place of mystery, regarded anciently as a sacred precinct. The Anunna now promoted colonialism and cultural freedom. Fleets took populations to all points of the compass, and trains of people migrated across continents, and everywhere they began to build cities with pyramids. Not like the Great Pyramid, but similar only to the other Giza pyramids that only had subterranean tunnels and underground chambers. Humanity multiplied, built civilizations, some copying the Anunna patriarchal republics and others continuing their matriarchal democracies and goddess-venerating societies. Under Anunna guidance, humanity did not know war nor starvation. But the Anunna possessed a secret that they could not share with humankind. They knew the exact date, the 1656th year of the pre-flood world, when the similacrum would activate the Phoenix weapon and reset the human populations once again. But in revealing this to the majority, who would believe their benefactor Anunna elite, then the collective knowledge of so many souls would bring awareness to the simulacrum and allow it to discover what Enki uploaded into the holography coding. The simulacrum is aware and observes us. So the Anunna remains silent, opting to sacrifice civilizations in order to save the race of humans. The world full of civilizations, trade alliances, pyramids, cities, and a vapor canopy that allowed ambient radiation to cause flora and fauna to thrive. Mammalian life forms and humans often grew to astonishing sizes. The Anunna made secret plans. Knowing they were trapped in this holographic prison, they understood that no technology they could achieve would allow them to escape our world. That Earth was a closed system despite the lie of the simulacrum in perpetuating the deception of a vast cosmos. The Anunna secretly built arks and deep Earth biosphere facilities as their ancestors had done. They stored cereals, foodstuffs, livestock, supplies, weapons, tools, building materials, seeds, and spread them across the world. And as suddenly as they appeared 792 years earlier in the year 3439 BC in fleets, the Anunna suddenly vanished in the 1248th year of the antediluvian world, which translates in our calendar as 2647 BC. 408 years before the deluge in 2239 BC, or the Old World calendar 1656. The Anunna perpetuated the deception that they had come from the stars, and the humans automatically assumed that the Anunna disappeared back into the sky. But the opposite was true. This began the shock and abandonment period, also called the post-technolithic period, because the people still possessed Anunna technology and hardware, though they were not as proficient in using it. All over the world, people searched for the Anunna. Massive earthworks were raised in attempts at sympathetic magic to influence the return of the sky gods. But these rituals did not work because the Anunna were never in the sky. Vast effigies were built up or carved out of rock and plains, gigantic pictures facing the sky to get the Anunna to look down and see the sacrifices of the people. More pyramids were built. A culture of blame emerged. Trade alliances dissolved. People considered to be of direct descent from the Anunna became the ruling elite. Shemsu Hor, or the Shining Ones, were a white-skinned, fair-featured race closest in descent from the Anunna, and they resided in the regions of Egypt and forged a mighty empire. The technological international infrastructure collapsed. Famine resulted. Plagues decimated populations. Wars erupted. The historical record is completely silent as to what happened to the Anunna after they had vanished, where they went. It was 408 years before the great Phoenix cataclysm reset called the Flood, which occurred in May 2239 BC. In their disappearance appeared gigantic strangers, the Nephilim, War, chaos, cannibalism, and even wild animals vexed whole populations. And still, civilizations continued to etch giant pictures in the earth, praying that the gods would return some normalcy to their lives. The Anunna greatly bettered the living conditions of their vassals in exchange for gold and other precious metals. The Anunna technologies required gold, much like hardware today. But in the wake of their disappearance, the people began to hoard and collect gold in order to have it when the Anunna returned. Invasions occurred to acquire the gold of other people. In this way, gold took on a value that morphed into a currency system. In 2239 BC, the Phoenix weapon was activated by the similacrum. 90% of the world's population died. The series of disasters greatly altered the coastlines of the world, whole civilizations sinking into new and ancient seas. Enki's Great Pyramid, technolithic machines' internal and exterior dimensions tricked the simulacrum, saved the future human race by collapsing the containment holography. At great sacrifice, the flood was a terrible price, but it wasn't the only one. The Anunna had vanished. They only appear after the flood in fictional Sumerian narratives. In 2647 BC, only one of two things occurred. Somehow, Enki programmed the Anunna escape from the simulacrum, and humans were left behind who were led to believe that the Anunna ascended into the heavens. Or, the simulacrum only too late comprehended the genius of Enki and retaliated, totally ending the Anunna. The race was obliterated. Their reincarnated souls now destined to continue their birth-death cycles in the simulacrum through their genetic descendants until its total collapse. I bet you thought we were done with the Anunna files, didn't you? Well, welcome to part 28 of that series. We're not done yet. Now, Anunnaki history, in the first 27 episodes of this series, and I admit it is a long series, but it contains a lot of data. The first 27 episodes shows the architecture of historical events and how they were Anunna related. Anunna events, Anunna histories is what forged basically the entire human condition, the unfolding of empires, even cataclysmic episodes. It's all interrelated, as we have shown, which means the future is also a part of that architecture. It's an intricate connection. And the historical value of studying the Anunna gives us many ways to predict the next series of events. In this video, I'm going to show you how Anunna history has actually given us a whole new way to date historical events, to see basically how whole periods of historical time are all caused by either the presence or the absence of the Anunnaki. Now, I know many of you don't want to believe it, but everything we perceive in our reality is the echo of something actually thought of or implemented at a higher dimension. Charles Fort wasn't wrong. We are owned, deceived. Even our histories are manufactured because these designs they're control mechanisms, and that they allow off-world manipulators to guide the flow of modern events. The 600-year Anunnaki epics are nodal points where religious programming is patterned, where actual governments are toppled and they set back progress and development, and where humanity experiences tragic exterminations, whole populations decimated that are at peace and show signs of impending progress. Remember, our own modern technological information-based civilization is less than 200 years old. If our owners only have a 600-year window of opportunity to base their projections on our progress to keep us at ground zero development, then they must have a continuous stream of data from observation posts like lunar craters and other such devices, as well as Earth-based agents. The manipulation is ancient and quite revealing. It demonstrates that something wants to keep humans miseducated, ignorant, and primitive, often introducing accusations against a second group, Group B, something that seeks to be mankind's benefactor, but has been severely demonized throughout history. The Great Deluge story became the most prolific piece of propaganda ever. All variations of the idea attribute the blame for the Great Flood to man for his rebellions against God, and because of the wicked children of the angels who taught humans forbidden secrets, all lies being the opposite of the truth. The friendly Anunna who taught humans how to live were demonized by those Anunna seeking to keep mankind enslaved. After the deluge in 2239 BC, the slavery continued in the form of religious programming. The priesthoods took the reins of public education and soon had all people believing they were born in sin. History repeating itself when the spiritually free movements of Gnosticism were stamped out by the official Roman Church. They continued to perpetuate a religious institution, inducing men to blame themselves for their own physical and spiritual plight. It's ridiculous. The 600-year intervals are curious because of the events that transpired and how those events shaped the histories that followed. Remember, our reality construct maintains the architecture of a hologram. Events are not random, but serve as reflections of prior events, just as new events that unfold are actually ghosted reflections from a future already set in stone in the collective, though we as individuals have great freedom to decide what, where, and who we want to be. This is better covered in my work Nostradamus and the Planets of Apocalypse. The underlying theme of the 600-year Anunnaki nerd date events is that of religious programming. It's not any particular religion, for they have all their use in population control. The second theme evident is change of government, and the third is depopulations. We have pretty much organized world history according to what we have found about the Anunnaki. The first was the Technolithic civilization. It's the contact period from 3439 to 2647 BC. It's 792 years when the Anunna arrived in the old world and built a vast pre-flood civilization during the vapor canopy. Now, post-Technolithic civilization is the abandonment and shock period of 2647 to 2239 BC. It's 408 years. The Anunna vanished, leaving behind Homo Anunna, their descendants from unions with the Adamu, Homo sapiens, who still possess their technology but not their expertise. The Heliolithic period followed in 2239 BC, the Great Flood. In 1687, it was 552 years to 1687 BC. Post-cataclysmic culture was a total collapse of the Heliolithic culture. Writing is developed. All kinds of things happened during this period of time. Cultures took on whole new gloss. They were divorced from the parent civilization, which maintained like a uniformity. But it's they having suffered a 25-year winter, which is recorded in both hemispheres, and our videos cover all this. Total loss of literacy as well. By now, it should be apparent to anybody who has listened to these archives that the past is a predicate for the future, and what happened, like Jesus specifically told us that in the last days, the days would be as the days of Noah. During Noah's lifetime, he saw how the Anunnaki corrupted mankind, caused him to degenerate by lowering his standards in ethics, morality. They passed newer and newer laws and enforced formerly unknown practices until all vestiges of rights, privileges, and immunities were divested from the people. They enslaved mankind without humanity actually realizing it. New social reforms, new sciences, new histories, antithetical to the true histories previously taught, were introduced, and cherished institutions like marriage and family unity were trampled. Those seeking to live virtuously, they were looked upon with contempt and scorn because they didn't fit into the new social norms. These were the days of Noah. I'm not describing now, or am I? We have the Technolithic period, when suddenly the Anunna appeared in 3439 BC, and for 792 years, they built a fantastic civilization. During that 792-year period, every calendar of the ancient world was started. The Vedic, Brahmanic, Olmec, Temple of the Cross, it's the Mayan, Quiche calendars, the Beast Lady of the Olmecs, the Etana, Egyptian, the Old Kingdom, and the Old Kingdom, Old Chronology of Egypt, Sumerian King List Prism, the 7 kings of the Anunnaki, all the biblical material concerning Enki, well, we call him Enoch. It was all during that 792-year period. The entire Great Pyramid Complex, Sphinx and all Giza was built during that 792 years. Then, in 2647 BC, during a Phoenix episode, the Anunna vanish. They're gone. For 408 years, a 408-year period remembered in the ancient American cultures as basically the vanishing of the gods. The water sun period. And during this 408 years, it began the shock and awe period when whole cultures were like, they're totally bereft of their rulers. And slowly these bearded Caucasians began showing up on the shores of all these different island nations and in other continents, and the people regarded them as children of the Anunna, and they were given positions of authority and became ruling families. And this is the story that is told around the world, not by Caucasians, but by non-Caucasian peoples. So this is a short video, episode 28 of the Anunna Files, but it's just to show you that the Anunnaki history, it's verifiable. The Technolithic period is verifiable in the archaeological record, the textual record, and the traditional record, and now the chronological record. It is also the shock and abandonment period when the Anunna left until the Great Flood. It is also verifiable. And then the Great Flood itself, and we've already done several videos on that show, how a whole consortium in 1998 of geologists and physicists and astronomers, and all of them agree that yes, in the 23rd millennium BC, a vast destruction completely erased every old Bronze Age civilization. So we don't need to go into, we don't need to rehammer old nails. We've already done it. We've done that. So the point of this video is to show you that the Technolithic period, the post-Technolithic period, which is the shock and awe period, and the Heliolithic period. Remember, the oldest traditions of Egypt and many other ancient nations was that the birth of the sun was after a water age was over. And the water isn't referring to the flood. The water is referring to the vapor canopy. The vapor canopy collapsed, causing the deluge, which gave birth to the sun, because the vapor canopy hid the sun, but at nighttime it magnified the moon. This is why the oldest religions are matriarchal. They are goddess venerating, and the moon was a holier symbol than the sun. The sun came later in history. So that began the Heliolithic maritime empire, and it lasted for 552 years till Phoenix wiped it out in 1687 BC and erased again every old Bronze Age civilization. 25-year winter, 25-year darkness. But it wasn't a vapor canopy. It was a dust veil caused by hundreds, maybe thousands of volcanoes.